It had been a long week for the CEO. The stress of running a large company weighed heavily on him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with his stores. Sales were steady, profits were up, but there was a sense of something missing. He'd been hearing rumors for months that employees weren't happy, but no one had been able to explain exactly why. Some workers had even quietly suggested that the company was losing its touch, but no one spoke up directly. So he came up with an idea. What if he went undercover and experienced the day-to-day life of his employees for himself? He'd spent years in a corner office, running meetings, making deals, and signing checks. But in all that time, he'd never seen the world through the eyes of the people who kept his company running. He decided to test this idea in one of his oldest stores, located in a bustling neighborhood that had recently seen a sharp decline in foot traffic. The store had been there for years, but something about it seemed off, like the energy had faded. Was it the employees? Was it the leadership on the ground? He wasn't sure, but he needed to find out. So he made a bold decision. He would disguise himself, work alongside the staff, and see if he could uncover what was really going on. The plan was simple. He would walk in like any other new employee, someone who wasn't important. No special treatment. He would get an entry-level job on the night shift, packing shelves, cleaning, and doing whatever needed to be done. After all, if he was going to see things from their perspective, he couldn't stand out. He used a fake name and wore a simple uniform, nothing fancy, nothing to draw attention. His goal was to blend in completely. His first night on the job was eye-opening. The store was busy with customers, but the mood among the employees was different from what he expected. The workers were polite, but there was a certain heaviness in the air. The laughter and easygoing chatter he had imagined didn't seem to exist. Instead, there was a quiet tension, like everyone was just going through the motions. As he settled into his duties, he tried to learn what he could. He didn't want to seem like a boss trying to figure out what was wrong. So he kept his head down, focused on his work, and observed. It didn't take long before he noticed a few things. The employees were rushed and stressed. A few of them looked exhausted, like they hadn't had a decent break in days. They were moving fast, but not with a sense of pride or joy, more out of necessity. It felt like they were just trying to get through their shifts, not truly engaging in their work. That's when it hit him. This wasn't just about bad management or tough sales. This was about the people. Something wasn't right with the staff, and he needed to find out what. Then, on his second night working at the store, he saw something that shocked him. While he was restocking the shelves near the back of the store, he noticed a figure standing in the corner of the storage room. It was the janitor, who was usually a familiar face to everyone in the store. The janitor was always around, keeping things clean and making sure the store ran smoothly behind the scenes. But tonight, something was different. He wasn't moving around as usual. Instead, he was standing with his back turned to the rest of the store, his body shaking. The CEO felt a wave of unease. He knew he needed to find out what was going on, but he didn't want to invade the janitor's space. He hesitated for a moment, but then decided he couldn't ignore it. He had to understand. He walked slowly toward the janitor, trying not to make any noise. The janitor was wiping his eyes, trying to hide the tears, but it was clear that he was upset. The CEO stood for a moment, unsure of what to do or say. He wasn't used to seeing someone in this kind of distress, especially not in the workplace. "Are you okay?" The CEO asked gently. The janitor didn't immediately respond. He just stood there, staring at the floor. The CEO could see that something deep was troubling him, something much more than just a bad day at work. The janitor hesitated, but eventually turned to face him, wiping his eyes quickly as if trying to hide the tears. "I'm fine," the janitor muttered, his voice shaky. "It's just ... It's been a long few weeks." But the CEO could tell that there was more to it. It wasn't just the normal stress that everyone faces at work. There was a deeper pain behind the janitor's eyes. The CEO knew he had to dig deeper. "Can I help?" the CEO asked, his voice sincere. The janitor paused, looking down at his feet. He seemed to wrestle with himself for a moment, unsure whether to open up. Finally, he sighed, looking around to make sure no one else was listening. "It's just ... Things have been tough. he started, his voice quiet. "I've been working extra hours to make up for lost income, but it's still not enough. My wife is sick, and the medical bills are piling up. I'm doing everything I can, but it feels like it's never enough." The CEO felt his heart drop. He hadn't expected this. He had no idea that one of his own employees was going through such a difficult time. "I don't know what else to do," the janitor continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm tired, and I just don't see how it's going to get better." The CEO stood in silence for a moment, taking in what he had just heard. It wasn't just about the hours or the pay, it was about a man who was struggling to keep his family together, trying his best but feeling like he was running out of options. "I didn't know," the CEO said softly. "I had no idea?" The janitor didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes said it all. It was a mixture of relief and frustration. Relief that someone was finally listening, but frustration at the hopelessness of his situation. The CAO knew that he had to do something. This wasn't just an isolated incident. This was a reflection of a bigger issue in his company, something he had missed for far too long. But what was the solution? For the first time, he understood that his job wasn't just about profits or managing a business. It was about the people, the workers who made everything happen. He needed to know what was happening in his stores, what was affecting his employees, and why they were feeling so drained and defeated. He couldn't ignore it anymore, and so, with a feeling of determination, the CEO knew he had to go further. He couldn't just be a boss in a corner office anymore. He had to step into their world, see the struggles firsthand, and figure out a way to make things right. But what he didn't realize yet was that this one encounter would set off a chain of events that would change the way he led his company forever. The CEO stood there, looking at the janitor who was trying to compose himself, his eyes still red from the tears. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The CEO felt an overwhelming sense of guilt. He couldn't believe that he had been so far removed from what was happening in his stores. He had no idea how much his employees were struggling. And here was a man, working tirelessly every day, holding everything together, but barely keeping his head above water. The janitor stood quietly, avoiding the CEO's gaze. The CEO didn't want to make him feel uncomfortable, but he couldn't just walk away. He wanted to help. He felt like he had to do something, but he wasn't sure what. "Look, I didn't mean to pry into your personal life," the CEO said gently. "But if you ever need to talk about anything, I'm here. You don't have to carry this alone." The janitor gave a small, forced smile, but the sadness in his eyes didn't go away. "Thanks, but there's not much anyone can do. You can't fix everything, right?" The CEO could tell the janitor was trying to be strong, trying to put on a brave face. But the pain in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about the job. It was about survival. It was about trying to hold things together when life kept pushing you down. The CEO had never realized just how hard things could get for the people on the ground. The ones who worked behind the scenes and made everything run smoothly. He didn't know how to respond, so he stayed quiet for a moment. The janitor turned his back and began wiping down the shelves again, moving slowly as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. The CEO watched him for a while, his heart heavy with what he had just heard. It was clear that this wasn't just one person's problem. It was a symptom of something much bigger. The CEO had spent years in meetings, making big decisions and overseeing the business from a distance. But now, standing in that store, he realized that he had been completely out of touch. He had no idea what his employees were really going through. He didn't understand their struggles, their frustrations, or their hopes. They were just names and numbers on reports, but to them, this was their life. This was their reality. He didn't know exactly what to do next, but he knew he couldn't just keep going like he had been. The company had grown fast, and somewhere along the way, it had lost sight of the people who had made it all possible. The employees who had been there from the start, the ones who had worked long hours and sacrificed their time and energy, they were being forgotten. And now, standing in front of him, the CEO could see how much they were hurting. He took a deep breath. There was a lot to fix, and it wouldn't be easy, but he couldn't ignore it anymore. He couldn't sit in his office and pretend everything was fine while people like the janitor were silently suffering. He had to find out more, had to understand what was happening, and how he could make things right over the next few days. The CEO kept his head down and worked alongside the employees. He didn't want to draw attention to himself, so he stuck to his low-level duties, stocking shelves, cleaning up, and just being there, with no special treatment. But everywhere he went, he started to see the same signs, the same exhaustion, the same tension, the same lack of energy. The employees were tired. They were overworked and underappreciated. They did their best every day, but it wasn't enough. And it wasn't just the janitor. It was everyone. One night, after his shift, the CEO found himself sitting on a bench in the break room, trying to process everything he had seen. The store was quieter now, the customers had left, and the employees were taking their breaks. Some of them were chatting quietly, others were scrolling through their phones, but none of them seemed happy. They looked like they were just trying to get through the night. The CEO had a chance to talk to a few more employees during the break. He didn't want to ask too many personal questions, but he was getting a clearer picture. Most of them seemed to be struggling financially. Many of them were working multiple jobs, juggling family responsibilities or dealing with personal issues, but they all kept their heads down and worked hard, as if that was the only thing they knew how to do. One woman, who worked as a cashier, spoke quietly about how hard it was to make ends meet. "My hours got cut a while back," she said. "I used to work more shifts, but they don't schedule me as much anymore. I've been trying to pick up extra hours here and there, but it's just not enough." Another employee, a stock worker, nodded in agreement. "It's the same for me. I used to get more hours, but now they cut back. I'm not sure how I'm going to pay my rent this month." The CEO was struck by how matter-of-fact they were about it. It wasn't just a bad day or a temporary problem. This was their reality. They were working harder than ever, but it wasn't getting them anywhere. They were stuck in a system that wasn't working for them, and they were too tired to even think about how to change it. As the night went on, the CEO began to feel a sense of urgency. These weren't just isolated problems, they were widespread. This was happening in his stores all over the place. His employees were struggling, and he had to do something about it. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. Changing things at the company level would take time, but he couldn't keep ignoring the fact that his employees were being pushed to their limits. They were the backbone of his business, and if they weren't happy or healthy, the whole company would eventually suffer. The CEO realized that this wasn't just about fixing one store. It was about fixing the entire company. He needed to make real changes, ones that would benefit everyone, from the people on the front lines to the executives in the office. But first, he needed to learn more. He needed to understand what was really going on, why people were being treated this way, and how it could be fixed. He couldn't make any changes based on assumptions. He needed to hear from the employees themselves, those who had been silently struggling for so long. The next day, he decided to take a bigger step. He wasn't going to stop here. He was going to spend more time with the employees, get to know them better, and understand their needs. He was going to take a hard look at the company's policies, the way things were being run, and find out where things were falling short, but he knew that it wouldn't be enough to just understand the problems. He had to take action. He had to make changes that would truly make a difference in his employees' lives. The CEO had always been focused on profits, but now, for the first time, he understood that the real value in his company wasn't just in the numbers, it was in the people. And he was determined to fix the system that had been failing them. After spending several days working undercover in the store, the CEO's perspective had shifted entirely. He had seen more than he expected, and it was clear that the problems weren't just about one person struggling, they were widespread. Employees were overworked, underpaid, and constantly juggling personal problems that were affecting their work. But it wasn't just the lack of pay or the long hours. It was the deeper issue of feeling overlooked, like they didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. As he continued to work alongside the team, he began noticing patterns that he hadn't seen before. It wasn't just the janitor or the cashier, everyone seemed to be struggling in some way. It was almost like a silent struggle that no one was openly talking about, but it was present in the atmosphere of the store. The employees moved through their shifts with an air of quiet exhaustion, as if they had given up on expecting anything better. One evening, while restocking the shelves near the back of the store, the CEO overheard a conversation between two employees. They were talking about how difficult it had been to make ends meet lately, how they were getting fewer shifts, and how they were barely scraping by. It wasn't just one or two people. It was nearly everyone he spoke with. There was a universal sense of frustration. But what hit him hardest was that no one felt like they could do anything about it. "Have you heard anything about the schedule for next week?" one of the employees asked. The others shook their head. "No, I think they're cutting back even more. Some people might even lose hours altogether. Honestly, I don't know how we're supposed to survive on this." The CEO's heart sank as he listened. It wasn't just the money that was the issue, it was the uncertainty, the feeling that at any moment everything could be taken away. The employees didn't feel secure in their jobs, and that was creating a sense of anxiety and fear that hung over the store like a dark cloud. It made the CEO realize something important. This wasn't just a problem with scheduling or hours. It was a reflection of a bigger issue, the company's culture. He had been so focused on profits, sales targets, and meeting numbers that he had missed what really mattered: the people who made all of it possible. As he watched his coworkers go about their work, he realized that many of them didn't feel valued. They weren't just employees, they were individuals with lives outside of work, with families to support, with dreams and struggles of their own. The work they did every day was important, but the company had treated them as replaceable. It was easier to focus on the bottom line than to see the human beings behind the tasks. One night, after his shift, the CEO took a walk around the store. It was late, and most of the customers had left, leaving the store eerily quiet. The lights hummed overhead as he walked down the aisles, his mind racing with everything he had learned over the past few days. He thought about the employees he had spoken to, the ones who had opened up about their struggles. He thought about the janitor, who had cried in the storage room and admitted how overwhelmed he was by life. He thought about the cashier, who had told him how difficult it was to make ends meet with fewer shifts. And he thought about the stock worker, who had shared how worried he was about his future with the company. These weren't just stories. These were real people with real challenges, and they weren't just looking for a paycheck, they were looking for dignity. They wanted respect. They wanted to feel like their work mattered, like they were part of something bigger than just a job. The CEO had spent so much time in boardrooms and offices, making decisions that affected numbers on a spreadsheet. But he had never stopped to think about the people behind those numbers. It was a painful realization, but he knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. Over the next few days, he continued to observe and interact with the employees. He tried to talk to as many people as possible, asking them how they felt about the company, what they needed, and how they thought things could improve. The responses were often similar. People wanted more security in their jobs. They wanted fair treatment. And they wanted to feel like they were being seen and heard. But one conversation stood out to him more than the others. It was with a young woman who worked as a cashier. She had been working at the store for over 3 years and had always been one of the most reliable employees. Yet, when he asked her how things were going, she looked him straight in the eye and said something that stayed with him long after their conversation was over. "I feel invisible," she said quietly. "I've been working here for so long, but it feels like no one even notices. We're just numbers on a schedule. We're just workers who show up to do our job and go home. It's like we're not even part of the company." Her words hit him hard. He had never once thought about it like that. For him, the company was a living, breathing entity, a collection of people working together to achieve a common goal. But for his employees, it felt different. It felt like they were just cogs in a machine, easily replaced and constantly ignored. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how deeply the company's culture needed to change. It wasn't enough to just fix the schedules or give people more hours. That wasn't the real issue. The issue was that people didn't feel valued and they didn't feel like they had a stake in the company's success. They were working hard every day, but they didn't feel like their work made a difference. The CEO began to see that the company had lost touch with its employees. It had become too focused on profit margins, efficiency, and performance metrics. Somewhere along the way, the people who actually did the work had been forgotten. He knew he had to make a change, but he wasn't sure where to start. He couldn't change everything overnight, but he could start by making small adjustments, by showing his employees that he truly cared about them, not just their productivity. He could listen more. He could understand their struggles. He could give them the support they needed to succeed, not just in their jobs, but in their lives outside of work as well. The first step was to address the issue of job insecurity. He knew that the constant fear of losing hours or getting laid off was taking a toll on his employees. No one should have to live with that kind of anxiety, especially when they were working hard every day to contribute to the company's success. The CEO decided to sit down with the management team and discuss a new approach, one that focused on providing employees with stable hours, better communication, and more opportunities for growth. He wanted to create a work environment where people felt like they had a future with the company, not just a temporary job. It was a long road ahead, but the CEO knew that change had to come from the top down. He couldn't fix everything overnight, but he was determined to take the first step. The next day, he gathered all the employees for a meeting. For the first time since he had started working undercover, he stood in front of them as their CEO, not just a new worker. The room fell silent as they realized who he was. "I've seen what's going on," he said, his voice steady but full of conviction. "I've seen how hard you all work, how much you give, and I want you to know that I'm here to listen. We're going to make some changes. We're going to treat you with the respect you deserve, and we're going to build a company where you feel like you matter. You are not just numbers to us. You are the heart of this company, and it's time we start acting like it." The room was quiet for a moment, but then something unexpected happened. One by one, employees began to clap, slowly at first, and then louder, until the entire room was filled with applause. It wasn't just about the promises he had made, it was about the fact that, for the first time in a long time, someone had listened. Someone had seen them, and in that moment, the CEO knew that this was just the beginning. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was the right thing to do. The CEO had made his decision. He knew that the moment he revealed his identity, things were going to change. There was no going back now. As he stood before his employees, he could feel a sense of nervous excitement bubbling inside him. It wasn't just about speaking to them as their boss, it was about connecting with them as human beings. He had spent so much of his life focused on numbers, on profits, on growth, but now, for the first time, he was focused on the people who made all that possible. As the room quieted down, the CEO took a deep breath. He had seen their struggles firsthand, the exhaustion, the frustration, and the hopelessness that had become part of their everyday lives. He couldn't ignore it anymore. He couldn't just keep hiding behind his position, pretending that everything was fine. He had to step up, acknowledge what was happening, and begin to make real changes. "I know a lot of you are probably surprised to see me here," he began, his voice calm but filled with sincerity. "And I want to be completely honest with you. I've been working undercover in this store for the past few days. I wanted to understand what's really going on, and what I've seen. It's been eye-opening." The employees exchanged curious glances, some looking confused, others trying to piece together what the CEO was saying. The CEO continued, choosing his words carefully. "I've seen how hard you all work. I've seen how much you give every single day, and yet I've also seen the stress, the exhaustion, and the uncertainty that you all face. It's clear that something has gone wrong somewhere along the way. We've lost touch with what really matters, and I'm here to tell you that we're going to fix it." There was a moment of silence. Some employees seemed unsure about what to make of his words, while others were still processing the shock of learning that their CEO had been working alongside them in disguise. But the truth was, the CEO didn't expect to win them over with just words. He knew that actions would speak louder than anything he could say. "I'm not here to make excuses," he continued. "I'm here to take responsibility for the way things have been. As the leader of this company, it's my job to make sure you all feel valued, supported, and respected. And clearly I failed in that." The weight of those words hung in the air. It wasn't easy for him to admit that he had failed. After all, as a CAO, he had always prided himself on making the right decisions. But what he had come to realize over the past week was that leadership wasn't just about making tough calls and hitting targets. It was about creating an environment where people felt safe, where they felt heard, and where they knew that their well-being mattered just as much as the company's profits. The CEO could see the employees starting to lean in, their curiosity piqued by what he was saying. He knew this was his chance to begin rebuilding the trust that had been lost. But words alone weren't enough. He had to show them that he meant what he said, that he was ready to make real, lasting changes. "I'm going to do something I've never done before," he said, his voice steady. "I'm going to ask you to tell me what's wrong. What do we need to fix? What can we do better? I'm here to listen, and I want to make sure that we're creating a company where you all feel like you have a future." The room was quiet for a moment. And then slowly, one by one, employees began to speak up. "We need more consistent hours," one employee said. "It's hard to plan when we don't know how many shifts we'll get each week." "I agree," another chimed in. "We're all working hard, but we never know if we'll have enough money to get by. It's stressful." The CEO listened intently, absorbing everything they were saying. This wasn't just about small issues. These were big problems that had been affecting the lives of his employees for far too long. He could see how much they needed stability, how much they needed to feel secure in their jobs. And an employee added, "We need to feel like we matter. Right now, it feels like we're just here to fill a spot. Like we're replaceable." The CEO nodded. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the truth. The truth he had been too blind to see before. It wasn't about cutting corners, reducing costs, or pushing employees to their limits. It was about making them feel like they were an essential part of something bigger. "I hear you," he said quietly, "and I want to make it right. I know that actions speak louder than words, so I'm going to do everything I can to fix this." He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what he was about to say. "We're going to start by improving scheduling. No more uncertainty. I'll make sure that every employee gets consistent hours and fair pay. And we're going to look at the way we treat people. We're going to make sure that you all feel respected, valued, and supported. This is the beginning of a new chapter for this company." There was a pause before the room erupted into applause. It wasn't just a polite clapping. It was a heartfelt response, a mixture of relief and hope. The CEO could see the change in their faces. For the first time in a long time, they were beginning to believe that things could be different, but he knew that this was just the first step. He had a long way to go, and the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. Changing the culture of a company wasn't something that happened overnight. He would need to stay committed, stay focused on making improvements that would benefit the employees in the long run. "We're also going to look at how we support your personal needs," the CEO continued. "I want to make sure you have the resources you need to take care of yourselves and your families. Whether that's health support, financial guidance, or just a better work-life balance, we're going to make those changes." The employees were nodding in agreement now, their energy shifting. For the first time in a long while, they were beginning to feel hopeful about their future with the company. They felt seen. They felt heard. And for many of them, that made all the difference. After the meeting, the CEO stayed behind and talked to several employees one-on-one. He listened to their stories, their concerns, and their hopes for the future. He wanted to understand what they were going through, not just as workers, but as people. And in doing so, he began to feel more connected to his team than he ever had before. The next day, the CEO met with the management team and began outlining the steps they would take to implement these changes. There was a lot to be done, but he knew that they couldn't waste any more time. They had to start fixing the broken systems that had led to so much frustration. He started by working with HR to create a more transparent scheduling system. ensuring that employees would know their shifts in advance and have the opportunity to plan their lives around their work. They also began exploring new employee benefits, including health coverage and financial planning programs, to help employees deal with personal struggles outside of work. In the weeks that followed, the CEO continued to meet with employees regularly, checking in with them to make sure that the changes were making a difference. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere in the store began to change. The employees started to feel more engaged, more motivated, and more hopeful about their future with the company, but the CEO knew that the real test would be in the long term. He couldn't just focus on making things better for a short time. He had to create a company culture that would continue to support his employees for years to come. As he walked through the store in the weeks that followed, he saw the difference. People were smiling more. They were working together, supporting each other, and feeling more confident in their roles. It was a small change, but it was a start. And for the CEO, it was everything. The CEO had always thought he understood the business. He'd spent years running the company, making tough decisions, and guiding it through every challenge. But as the weeks passed since his undercover experience, he realized just how little he had understood about what really mattered, the people who made the company run. The employees weren't just workers. They were individuals with lives, struggles, dreams, and fears. Their hard work built the company, but for so long, he had taken it for granted. In the days following his meeting with the employees, he felt a renewed sense of responsibility. It wasn't just about fixing a few problems here and there. It was about creating a company that genuinely valued its people, a company that didn't just care about profits but also about the well-being of its staff. He knew he had to keep pushing for change. The first step had been easy, at least in comparison to what lay ahead. He had addressed the immediate issues: unpredictable hours, the feeling of being undervalued, and the lack of support for employees. But the real work was just beginning. It was one thing to promise change, but it was another thing entirely to make that change a reality. The CEO met with the leadership team regularly, holding them accountable for the promises he had made. They discussed how to improve scheduling, how to create better lines of communication with employees, and how to foster a culture where everyone felt valued. It wasn't enough to just implement changes. They needed to shift the entire culture of the company. He worked closely with HR to design new programs that would help employees feel supported in all areas of their lives. Health and wellness programs were introduced, offering employees access to healthcare resources and mental health support. Financial planning workshops were created to help those who were struggling with budgeting, savings, and managing debt. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was a start. The CEO wanted to make sure that the company didn't just pay lip service to the idea of caring for its employees. He wanted to create real change that would impact people's lives for the better. Over the next few months, things began to slowly improve. Employees started to feel more secure in their jobs. They could count on consistent hours, which allowed them to plan their lives better. There was less anxiety about whether they'd be able to pay bills or make ends meet. The changes weren't just on paper. They were visible in the way employees talked to each other, the way they worked together, and the way they began to feel more engaged with the company's mission. But the CEO knew that culture changes didn't happen overnight. He also knew that one of the most important things he could do was to stay visible, to keep listening to the employees, and to ensure that the changes they had made were actually making a difference. One evening, after another long day of meetings, the CEO decided to walk through the store again. Just like he had done during his undercover stint. He wanted to see how things were now, how people were feeling after all the changes. As he walked through the aisles, he noticed something that warmed his heart. The employees were talking more freely. They were laughing, sharing stories, and even working together on some of the tasks that used to be done alone. It felt different, lighter, more connected. There was a sense of camaraderie that hadn't been there before. He saw the janitor, who had been so distraught when the CEO had first met him. The man was still cleaning, but this time there was a smile on his face as he worked. The CEO remembered the tears he had seen that night, the frustration, and the fear. But now the man seemed at peace. He was still working hard, but it was clear that something had shifted in his outlook. He wasn't just a worker anymore, he was part of a team, part of something that valued him. The CEO approached him, taking a moment to say hello. "How's everything going?" he asked. The janitor looked up, surprised but pleased to see him. "It's been better," he said, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I'm still working hard, but I feel like things are starting to make sense now. The changes you promised, they're making a difference. I'm not as stressed about my hours anymore, and it feels good to be seen." Hearing those words felt like a weight had been lifted off the CEO's shoulders. He had worked hard to make sure that employees like the janitor didn't feel invisible anymore. The small moments of connection were what mattered most. They weren't just about improving work conditions, they were about giving people back their dignity, their confidence, and their hope. As the CEO walked through the store, he continued to see similar signs of change. Employees who had once seemed distant or disengaged now stopped to chat, to offer a smile, or to ask how he was doing. The atmosphere was different. People weren't just coming in to punch the clock, they were coming in because they felt like they belonged. The company was no longer a place where people just worked for a paycheck. It was a place where they could grow, be valued, and take pride in their work. The CEO realized that he had learned more in these past few months than he had in all his years of running the company. The key to success wasn't just about managing the business, it was about managing the people. He needed to invest in them, to create an environment where they could thrive, but even with the improvements, there was still work to be done. He knew that creating a truly supportive company culture would take years of consistent effort. It couldn't just be a one-time initiative. It had to become a way of life within the company, woven into every decision, every action, every interaction. He couldn't afford to let the company fall back into old habits. To keep the momentum going, the CEO decided to continue working closely with employees at all levels. He made it a priority to have regular check-ins with staff, to ask them about their experiences, their concerns, and their ideas for improvement. He didn't want to lose touch again. He wanted to be an active participant in the company's culture, not just a distant figure making decisions from a boardroom. The employees, in turn, began to feel more empowered. They saw that their feedback was not only heard but acted upon. They were becoming part of a new, collaborative culture, one where their voices mattered. They started to take pride in the work they did, knowing that their efforts were making a difference. The CEO knew that this wasn't a quick fix, and there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. The company wasn't perfect yet, but it was better. The employees felt more secure, more valued, and more connected to the company's mission. And that was something that no profit margin could ever replace. One day, as he sat in his office looking at the company's quarterly report, the CEO realized that the numbers weren't the only thing that mattered anymore. Of course, profits were important. They always would be. But now, he understood that the real success of the company wasn't just about growth on paper. It was about how people felt when they came to work. It was about their well-being, their happiness, and their sense of purpose. And as he looked out the window of his office, watching the employees work in the store, he knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome, but the company was heading in the right direction. It wasn't just about being successful in business. It was about being successful in creating a company that truly cared for the people who made it all possible. And for the CEO, that was the greatest achievement of all.